Well, welcome to class this morning. I'm really excited to get to teach this lesson. It's going to be a little bit intense in the sense that we're going to be talking about some ideas and some concepts that for many of you may be fairly new. If y'all are coming in, just come on in. There are chairs, and we'll find chairs and we'll get chairs. Just keep coming. Don't let the fact, we've got a chair here. We've got a couple over there. Brent took care of them right over there. Thank you, Brent. Please come on in and grab a seat. We are so very excited that you would be here this morning. If you have seen the first 3 lessons that I taught on why I'm not an atheist, you'll know that I've changed the background screen. I've decided to go post-industrial. I think that's what this look is called. The green thing was just reminding me of pea soup, and frankly, I'm not a fan. So I had to change it. But what we're about is not changed in this class. What we're about is talking about why I'm not, and this is me. This is Mark Lanier. It's not you. But I want to let you know why I'm not some various things. So I talked about why I'm not an atheist, and we spent 3 weeks on it. You can go watch it on the internet. You can download the lessons and read them as well. We also had Melvin Tinker come and speak for 2 weeks on why he's not a Buddhist. And I'm still thankful for that. You can also get those on the internet. Today, we start a few weeks on why I'm not an agnostic. And we open the door, and we need to first understand what agnosticism is. So if we look in that door, agnostics are people who don't believe in God, but they're not ready to say that they're certain that there's no God. They'll say, no, I don't believe in God, but I'm not going to say it's impossible. They kind of are on the intellectual fence. They don't see the evidence for God outweighing the evidence against God. And so they don't make an affirmation of faith. Now, I think agnostics are a little bit more on a more intellectually honest foundation in some ways than I think atheists are. I think as an atheist, you would need to prove to me that there is no God, and I have yet to see an atheist who can prove there is no God. But as an agnostic, you can just say, hey, I don't see the proof either way. I can't see the proof that there's a God. I can't see the proof that there is not a God. So I'm neutral. I'm the Switzerland of beliefs. And I have respect for that. And if that's where you are in your life, I respect you. But I want to share with you why I don't join you. I want to share with you why I do believe that the existence of God is something that is provable. And so that's what I want to do this morning. And I want to start out by telling you this. I was trying a case one time. Dr. Bob was with me. We were trying this case in Houston, Texas. It's been probably 15 plus years ago, maybe 20 years ago now. But in the case, there was an issue. There had been an underground blowout of a lot of petroleum product. And the blowout had happened north of a subdivision, up dip, as we might say in a sense, north of the subdivision that ultimately is going to draw drinking water from the aquifer where the blowout happened. Now, the company that did the blowout did not tell the Railroad Commission of Texas like they should have, and so it wasn't in the books, and nobody knew about the blowout. The company was also not able to salvage out all of the hydrocarbons, the petroleum products that leaked into the aquifer. Ultimately, the subdivision had drinking water that had 10,000 times the legal limit of benzene. 10,000 times the legal limit of benzene was in the water, and it had gone undetected for over 5 years while people were bathing, showering, cooking, and drinking the water. There were over 400 people whose health had been affected, and the judge pulled out 5 of them for us to try to see if we could find some general resolution. There were a lot of issues being fought in the case, but one of the core issues concerned a young man in his early teenage years at this point who had had leukemia and had spent 2 years battling the leukemia. Some kinds of leukemia have been linked to benzene as a cause. And so the question that we had, among other questions in the trial, was, did benzene cause this child's leukemia? Or was it at least a contributing cause to the child's leukemia? And I put on our case, and I put on all of our experts, and I put on all the evidence, and at the end of our case, the way the court works, after the plaintiff goes, if the judge determines that the plaintiff has put on enough proof to sustain a verdict, so that if a jury were to decide for the plaintiff, then the jury's verdict has enough evidence to back it up. If the plaintiff does that, then trial continues, and the defendant starts to put on their evidence to counter what the plaintiffs have said. So we were at that stage of the trial where the defendants put on their evidence. They called an expert witness who was what we might consider a toxicologist. That means this expert is going to testify about whether or not benzene at the levels that this kid was drinking it and bathing in it and cooking with it, everything, was benzene toxic? Could it have caused the child's leukemia? So the expert witness takes the stand. And the expert witness proceeds to say, benzene at 10,000 times the legal limit wouldn't hurt anybody. The legal limit is set so low that you can have 10,000 times that level and people are going to be fine. Yeah, I thought it was kind of funny too. But I did not have Miss Carolyn on the jury laughing. The jury was kind of paying attention, so I had to win this, okay? So the expert says this. So Bob and I, we go back that night. We're scratching our heads. We're trying to figure out how are we going to destroy this witness the next day. And we had a fellow working with us who was a chemist at Rice University. Now, Rice is the closest thing to Texas Tech that our community has. It is widely recognized to be one of the best institutions of higher learning this side of the Lubbock city limits. And so we had this chemist from Rice. And I said to the chemist, would you do me a favor? Can you do this tonight? I mean, this is 8, 9 o'clock at night. He said, what do you need? I said, I want you to take a mason jar and I want you to put water in it and then put in the water 10,000 times the legal limit of benzene. Bob said, we got to get a skull and crossbones on the jar, which we did. And we had the chemist seal the jar with a certificate seal that certified from him, Rice University, that this is water with 10,000 times the legal level of benzene. I went to the court the next morning. I had the jar hidden in my trial box. The jury's seated. The judge says, Mr. Lanier, your turn to cross-examine this witness. And I looked at the witness, and I first established the fact that the company, the oil company, was paying him an exorbitant amount of money to testify. I mean, he was being paid tens of thousands of dollars to stand up or sit down at the jury stand and say, benzene at 10,000 times the legal limit doesn't cause any disease. It's not a problem. So I'm hearing that, but the jury needs to know this guy's a jukebox. Okay, they put their money in and selected the song, and he's singing it. Okay? So I wanted to first establish that. Then after I established that, I leaned forward from where we were questioning witnesses, the podium. I leaned forward kind of conspiratorially. And I kind of whispered in a stage whisper, like nobody's hearing this except the jury and the judge and everybody in the courtroom. But we'll pretend it's just you and me. And I leaned in and I said, hey, that stuff you were saying yesterday about benzene at 10,000 times the legal limit being safe, you don't really believe that stuff, do you? And he said, well, yes. I said, oh, come on. I understand you got to say that. They're paying you to say that. You're saying it. We're here in a courtroom, da-da-da-da. I said, but just between you and me and the jury and the judge, you don't really believe that stuff, do you? And he said, well, absolutely I do. I said, huh. And I reached in and I pulled out my jar of benzene water with the red skull and crossbones on it. I said, sir, this is a jar of benzene water with benzene at 10,000 times the legal limit. You can see that because of the certificate here. It's been sealed by Rice University, chemistry department. I said, I guess if you really believe what you're saying, you really believe, you'll drink this right now in front of all of us. Well, he's looking at, and you know, the lawyers on the other side are thinking, you know, they're elbowing each other, stand up and object, stand up. And the other one, no, we're not going to object. It'll look like we know it'll make him sick. And they're all, and I'm just standing there. And you could read this guy, bless his heart. If you're watching this, I love you in the name of Jesus, but you were wrong. This fella does not, let me give you some advice, don't play poker. It was written all over your face, okay? This fella, you could just read him like a book. He was sitting there, he was going, you know, if I drink that, we'll win this case. Of course, if I drink that, I might get really, really sick. They are paying me, but they're paying me whether we win or lose. They're not paying me enough to drink a bunch of benzene poison. Then he's looking at me, and he's realizing, is that lawyer crazy enough to let me do this? You know, and I start getting a little twitch. I didn't get the twitch. That's an ad. And so I could read and so the fella decides he's going to bluff me. But I mean, it's like obvious. This is like playing poker with a 3-year-old. I mean, it's just not going to happen, okay? So the guy's going to bluff me. So he kind of reaches out a little bit, you know, with this. And I mean, I'm like all over it. So I just take the jar and I start walking up and I start to hand it to him. And right as I start to put it in his hand, he slinks back into the chair and he says, well, I'm not going to drink it. He said, what if the people at Rice got it wrong? I'm like, yeah, right. And the jury's like, yeah, right. And everybody knows that it doesn't matter what the guy said. The guy knows you don't drink benzene at 10,000 times the legal limit, even one time from a mason jar, much less bathe, cook, and drink it for 5 stinking years. You see, I have a problem with people who say they believe reality is one thing, but they live in a way that shows reality to be something altogether different. And I'm not going to make any jokes. Let's change this slide. Our view, I think we can all agree, our view of reality, how we view the world, what we believe to be true, our view of reality should align perfectly with how we live, how others live, with what we see and observe. What we believe should not be different than what reality is shown to be. They should be the same. They should be consistent. And that is the premise that underlies why I'm not an agnostic and why I believe there is proof that God really exists. Now, if we were in a courtroom and I had to prove this in a courtroom, anything I have to prove in a courtroom requires me to weigh evidence with a jury. You put all of the evidence on one side of an issue and you put all of the evidence on the other side of the issue, and then you consider the scales. And how does that evidence weigh in the scales? Does it weigh in favor of one position or another? And so that's what I have to do, and that's the way courts are conducted all the time. Now, there are different kinds of evidence because there are different kinds of things we have to prove in court. We have an entire book called the Federal Rules of Evidence. And if we're in federal court, those are rules that help us understand basic ideas of evidence and what's valid and what's not. They're not the whole story, but they're an important backbone. All right? And there are different kinds of evidence. So, for example, there is scientific evidence if we need to prove a fact of science. If I need to prove, that something is benzene, there are scientific tests that can be done to prove that it's benzene, and I have to put on scientific evidence to affirm the scientific fact. If I'm going to prove that the distance between me and Richard is 23 feet, then we can get a tape measure and measure it out and show that it's 23 feet. By the way, that's been done. When I was a young lawyer, there was an older lawyer that I admired a lot who was in trial in a small county out in East Texas. And the witness was on the stand, and the witness was guessing distance. And the lawyer said, "Sir, you're just guessing the distance that car was from that individual." Witness said, "Well, I'm a pretty good guesser." This happened to us in Lubbock as well. Yeah, I forgot. I used this old trick myself one time. So, but not as well as this lawyer did. Lawyer said, "Sir, what do you think's the distance between you and me?" And the guy said, "About 18 feet. And the lawyer said, "Measure it off." So the guy measures it off. Well, it was about 30 feet. He was off. The lawyer said, "What do you think's the distance between you and the door?" The guy said, "Well, that's going to be more. It's going to be about 45 feet. And the lawyer said, "Measure it off." No, it was 62 feet as he measured it off. Now, he says, "Look out the door. You see the water fountain down the hall?" "Yeah." "What do you think the distance there is?" 75 feet. "Measure it out." Witness leaves the door and starts to walk outside, at which point the lawyer says, "Your Honor, I passed the witness." You know, he just left the courtroom. Anyway, there is scientific evidence. Maybe you had to be there or you had to be a lawyer, but it was pretty funny. I mean, it's kind of like, what a joke. He just sent the guy on his way. There's scientific evidence. Well, that works. But even that's got limitations. So, for example, one of the things I had to prove in the benzene case is that benzene can cause this type of leukemia. Well, you don't do that in a laboratory. You do that with epidemiology evidence and some other factors called Bradford Hill factors. But you don't need to go into details. But even there, you're not getting it with scientific certainty. You're getting it within a 95% certainty, it's called. So anyway, you've got scientific evidence, which is useful for scientific matters. But most of what we prove in court's not science. You know, the existence of God is not science. God's not part of nature. God's outside of nature. So you don't use nature's tools to prove something outside of nature. That's using a ruler to check the temperature in the room. You know, it works for distances, but it doesn't work for temperatures. So, for example, if you've got a death penalty case, maybe the most important kind of decision a jury will ever assess is a death penalty case. In a death penalty case, the factors you've got to determine, the evidence that's got to prove to you that this person basically cannot be trusted and will never be able to be trusted again to live in the proximity of another human being. Well, you can't prove that with science, but it doesn't mean that no one ever proves it. I had to prove what type of suffering was involved in this kid who missed 2 years of school for benzene leukemia treatments, as he's in a bubble at MD Anderson for a bunch of that. Well, you can't prove with science how this affected his development and his anguish and things like that. We don't do that. So we have scientific evidence for science matters. We have direct evidence. Say, how did this affect you? And people can give direct evidence. I've been going back and forth with an atheist by email for over a year now, a fellow up in Canada who's a scientist. And he keeps telling me, I can't believe in God because there's no scientific proof. And I'm saying, hold on. Do you love your daughter? Oh, absolutely. I said, prove it by science. You can't prove love by science. There are things science tests work for science matters. But the law says there's a world of evidence outside of science. You know, we live in a tough age. We live in an age where people are so narrow in their schools and focus that some people become this type of a specialist or that type of a specialist, and they have tunnel vision for that. And so people have tunnel vision and they think proof means scientific proof. Heavens to Betsy, get outside your bubble. If we've got to prove things by scientific fact, there's not a case in the country that'll ever go to trial because you can't prove most things by science. There's circumstantial evidence. You're not going to prove by science that Johnny pulled the trigger unless you're able to get gunpowder and video footage and you can show all of that. But that doesn't mean you can't convict him if you've got all of the circumstances that show it. So all of this is legitimate evidence if you're really wanting to look at all the evidence. The problem is most atheists and agnostics, when they consider the evidence, they only want to look at scientific evidence. And that's just silly. That's just silly. Those are people who do not live in a world of proving things, which is my world. That's what I do for a living, is prove or disprove things. So, we've got competing views of reality. I've said one of the pieces of evidence I want to make sense of this life is my view of reality needs to align with my experience, with how I live, with who I am, who you are, what this world is like. If they align and they converge and they're one and the same, that's a huge piece of evidence that my reality is matching my view of reality. That what I say is in fact what I believe and show to be true. So here are the two competing views that I want to talk about as we get into this. One is, what does the world look like if there is no God. If the reality is there's no God, if that is in fact real, that's the truth, that's reality, then what does the world look like? And then I want to compare it to what the world looks like with at least one view of God. Not the only view, but the one that I'm most familiar with and the one that I'll keep coming back to because it's the one that actually does make sense, that aligns with experience, mine and anybody else's I've ever seen. So, if there's no God, let's start with no God. Let's think for a minute. Now, take aside emotion, take aside your pride, any of that aside, and just ask yourself honestly, what does it mean if there is no God? Here we are, billions of years after the Big Bang. We'll have to trust the astrophysicists and theoretical physicists for how you can have a Big Bang with substance when before there was no substance. But yeah, I'm setting that aside. I'm not going to argue that one right now. I'm going to say if they're right and that can happen, then here we sit and what you and I are sacks of chemicals. That's what we are. I've got this skin that's holding all of my chemicals inside. Some of my chemicals are held inside even more intensely in chemical structures that have gone together to be bones or muscles or fat. Lots of fat. But those are the chemicals, and that's all I am. I'm a sack of chemicals. Like, you're a sack of chemicals. Brandon, you're a sack of chemicals. Mel, you're a sack of chemicals. Jackie, you're a sack of chemicals. I mean, that's all we are. We're just a bag of chemicals. I mean, somewhere in time and history, these chemicals, stardust, remnants, have come together in such a way where they've kind of produced other chemical sacks and other chemical sacks that have gotten more and more complicated until here we are, a bunch of chemical sacks sitting in here eating donuts, which technically are chemical sacks as well, that you are now absorbing into your chemical sack. Not only are we sacks of chemicals, but if there's no God at all, then some of these chemicals have electrical interactions. Our neuron chemicals are firing. We've got these chemicals that are interacting with electricity in such a way that we have what we call thoughts. Conscious thoughts, aware of the fact that we're sacks of chemicals, able to perceive because of the chemicals we've got, able to perceive other sacks of chemicals that are all around us. So we're sacks of chemicals that have chemicals with electrical interactions in places. And then also we can say, if there's no God, that our sack of chemical and electrical interactions might differ from other animals in some ways. Human beings have higher states of consciousness. To put it into more scientific parlance, but actually it's not more scientific, it's a different science of parlance. Because the bottom line is we're a sack of chemicals that just happen to have some awareness because of electricity firing off in our brains of the fact we're a sack of chemicals. And we think that our electricity is firing in a way that's different than other animals, and that's going to be important because it's going to justify why you can go out there and eat other animals but not humans. So these are three fundamental gimmies if there's no God. I don't see how anybody's going to argue with these. We're sacks of chemicals. Some of our chemicals are having electrical interactions. Ours are happening in a different electrical chemical way than those of the fish in the sea. Now, from this, there are some easy deductions that I think are logical. Though I'm going to tell you now, there are agnostics and atheists who disagree with me on these, and we're going to get into them in more detail next Sunday because it merits more attention than I have time in one session. But here's one. If all we are remnants of stardust, sacks of chemicals that have somehow congealed together and got some electrical juices sparking in them, then there is really, in reality, nothing outside of us that is going to determine what is right and wrong, what is evil. Look, this is just a cosmic universe of stardust and remnants. We're just a bunch of assimilated sacks of chemicals. What is it outside of us that says, hey, it's wrong when a man rapes a woman? Well, we say it's wrong. Okay, but we're just sacks of chemicals. Is there anything outside of the sacks of chemicals that says it? That means, is there anything that's objective as opposed to subjective? Subjective means me, the subject, what I think is right and wrong. Objective means it's right or wrong whether I think it or not. Objective right or wrong is something I just need to learn or discover. Subjective right or wrong is something I decide. See the difference? So what is it outside of me or outside of you or the rest of our societal sacks of similar chemicals that dictates what's right and wrong? What's good or evil? And there's nothing if there's no God. So we have nothing that sets an objective right and wrong. And the bottom line is, we don't have anything that gives us anything too special anyway. And we'll get into this later, but let me just say, space dust is space dust. What's the basis for dignity in a human being? What is the basis for respect and love and value? We're just a bunch of space dust. We're just sacks of chemicals. Who's going to say one sack of chemical is inherently better than another sack of chemicals? Okay. Now, that's reality if there's no God. Now, there's another worldview, and I'm going to use the Judeo-Christian view of God. This is the view of God from Jewish scriptures and from Christian scriptures. It's the God that I believe in. And so it's easy for me to tell you what these views are. I'm not comparing no God to Buddhism right now or to some other religious system. I'm just going to compare it to the God revealed in what we normally call the Bible. The Hebrew scriptures, the Christian scriptures. And you can get everything I'm going to put on this chart simply from the Hebrew scriptures. But it's also confirmed in the Christian scriptures. So I put the two together. First, the teaching is that outside of our universe, outside of space and time, there exists a being called God. He's infinite. He's personal. And he has morality. He has a character, ethics. He is an infinite, personal, and a moral God that exists outside of space and time. In fact, he's responsible for space and time. He's the reason space and time exists. He is responsible for it. If you're a big banger, he set off the Big Bang. If you're wondering where any material came from for the Big Bang, he's the source of it. If you're not a big banger and you're a 6-day creationist, he's the source of it. This is the God who is responsible for nature, the universe, space, and time, but he's not captive in it. He exists out of it. Theological terms, he's transcendent as well as immanent. So we've got an infinite, personal, and moral God. The Jewish scriptures also teach us that human beings uniquely bear the image of this moral God. That he has made us in a way where we are also moral, but we are moral with a stamp of God's morality. So what God says is good, we inherently know is good. What God says is evil, we inherently recognize as evil. What God says is right, we understand is right. What God says is wrong, we inherently have. We are creatures who have been imprinted with this morality from the moral God who made us in his image. Furthermore, we learn that humans exist to be in a relationship with God. The Hebrew scriptures, the Christian scriptures teach us that we exist to be in a fellowship or a relationship with this incredible God. And if we're not in that fellowship, there's always something that's going to be in us that says, there's got to be more to life. I was made for more than this. There's got to be something to it. Because that's how we were made. We were made to be in this relationship. Now, those scriptures also tell us that human beings fail to measure up to God's perfection. So you got a moral God, and we've got humans in a state now where humans don't meet God's morality. But we're being told in scriptures that God will figure a way without becoming ungodly. God can justly figure out a way to restore the fellowship. Now, that's the Christian worldview. So here's the question. Who can live consistently? Who can pass the benzene test? Who can live consistently with their view of reality? Does your view of reality, is it reflected in the way you live? Or do you have double vision? Are you saying one thing, but your life betraying a different reality? Because here's what happens. If you look at these two views, there's only one of them is going to be correct. Between these two, there's only one that's right. There's only one reality. You might think there's no God, but if in fact, let's go here. If there's no God, all you Christians living under that Christian worldview are not living consistent with reality. Because reality says everybody lives on the no God side, whether you know it or not. But look at the other side of the coin. Because if the God reality worldview is right, if that's the truth of reality, then everyone lives in that reality whether they know it or not. And the person who says there's no God lives a life that betrays the error in their thought. Because the way they live confirms deep in their soul and essence the reality of the viewpoint that there's a God. So I want to weigh this evidence. I want to take the benzene test. I want to know which worldview explains our lives. If I really believe that benzene's not going to hurt me, I'll drink it. If I really believe it is going to hurt me, I won't. I want to live congruently with what I believe. And if I can't live with what I believe, then there's a problem with my belief system that needs to be addressed. So you put it in the scales. On one side of the scales, let's look at the reasons for no God. On the other side of the scales, let's look at the reasons for God. We're going to do this in the next coming weeks. So on the no God side, I got to tell you, I have serious problems with this idea that there's nothing out there that sets an objective right and wrong. I have yet to find anyone who can live consistently with that. That's got double vision all over it. That's the failed benzene test. Big. I have yet to find anyone who can consistently live that as if there's no objective, nothing outside of us that says right and wrong. That runs counter to everything we know. It runs counter to everything we do. If you read the history of philosophy on this issue, it's almost a funny experience because the philosophers have just danced all around the issue trying to figure out how can we say there's objective right and wrong when there's no object out there to tell us. And there are some well-known philosophers even today writing on it. And I will look at their arguments with you, and common sense and your own eyes are going to betray to you the problem here. Everybody's got to admit that rape and sexual assault are wrong. Not simply because they hurt the propagation of the species or something like that. There's something wrong about it. Mass genocide because of someone's genetic heritage is wrong. Slaving people because of the color of their skin is wrong. There's no excuse for any of those things. We know in our essence it's wrong. But if we're just sacks of chemicals, it's tough to find that. And I don't think that's going to pass the benzene test. We'll look at it more carefully next week. But let me tell you, the Judeo-Christian worldview explains the problem of objective right and wrong real easy. It makes it real clear. There's an infinite, personal, and moral God. He establishes right and wrong. It's His character. It's who He is. He made this world. Ingrained in the fabric of the world He's created or responsible for is in the DNA of our world, much less the DNA of us who are made in His image, is the trace, the remnants, the understanding of God's moral character. So the Christians can use words like that's not a good thing. And it's got meaning beyond just something subjective. The Christian can say that's an evil thing. And it's got meaning beyond, well, it's what I mean by that is this sack of chemicals with these electrical firings doesn't like it. It's really hard for me to teach this in 45-minute segments. And that's what we've got. I really, really hope you will come back next week, because I really want to get into this. I want to discuss all of the different options for why there is right and wrong, and who gets to set right and wrong. And again, if you're sitting there saying, well, this isn't, I thought when you said you were going to prove God, I'm ready for the mathematical formula. Heavens, God's not a mathematical formula. We can't reduce God down to math. We don't limit the God who created space and time to math. That's putting him in a box. He's too big for that. He's too big for any science test. Science is limited to space and time, and he's bigger than space and time. You'll never find a science space-time test that proves something outside of that. But you will find in the traces of our lives the evidence for what is real and what is illusion. And there are a lot of people who are living, professing illusion, but their lives show differently. So come next week. Next week, we're going to put ethics under the microscope. Also, next week, we've got a surprise. A song has been done by Phil Keggy for our class. He sent it to me yesterday. That's Phil Keggy a long time ago. But we've got a Phil Keggy agnosticism song he has sent us. That's Phil Keggy today. Look at that. That's a little different. That's called The Ravages of Time. I'll give you just a little preview. See if you can guess which song he's parodied for us.
I thought God was only true in fairy tales, meant for someone else but not for me. Our love was out to get me. I'm on a different team. Agnosticism was just another bad dream. And then I saw God's grace. I'm a believer.
Okay. Kill it. You'll get the whole song next week as we look a little bit more intently on that worldview. But now your points for home. 3 points for home. First, Psalm 97:6. The heavens proclaim God's righteousness. All the peoples see his glory. There is inherent in our universe the righteousness of God. Built into yours and my DNA. We are hardwired for God's morality. Everybody is. Everybody sees this aspect of God. They just don't realize what they're seeing. You can't talk to someone long without them inserting words into the conversation that really have no meaning to them except for the DNA meaning from God. Here's what I mean. I've still got 3.5 minutes. Y'all work with me. Okay. So I've been interacting with this fella from Canada in emails. And I've really been chasing this down with him. He says, yes, there's objective right and wrong. I said, okay, now where's it come from? Well, he says, well, we just know what things are good and what things aren't. I said, wait. You're using the word good. Now, I use the word good, and I know what it means. It means this is something God would do. When you use the word good, you're just a sack of chemicals having these electrical interactions. What does good mean to you? Well, something that's right. I said, no. That's circular reasoning. You've just defined it by itself. Oh, what's right? Well, and he can't fall into the traps of saying, well, it's what I decide, because then it's not objective right and wrong. Then it's just him. So it's really interesting. So I really am excited to get into that with you, because the heavens do proclaim God's righteousness. All the peoples see God's glory. They just don't realize what they're seeing. Some people don't see the forest because of all these trees in the way. Next, Psalm 101:2. I will ponder the way that is blameless. That's part of your homework for this week. I want you to be thinking about right and wrong. Just the process of thinking about right and wrong has value. Of course it has value in how we live, but it has value in reality. Now, I'm not telling you, one of the big things agnostics make a big issue about is, oh, you're saying you can't be an atheist or agnostic and be a good person. No, I'm not at all. You can be. Because it's hardwired into your DNA. Just because you don't think there's a God doesn't mean there's not a God. You may be saying there's no God, but you're still living over in my world where He made you, and He made you moral. So you can still be a good person in a moral sense, even though in your brain you think reality's over there. That makes real good sense to me. What doesn't make sense to me is how you can live over here in a world of no God and try to claim that there's an objective good and say, I'm good. What do you mean good? You're a sack of chemicals. There's a uniqueness of the Christian worldview that's worth pondering. And so this is how we've started opening the door to why I'm not an agnostic. I hope you'll join me next week. Can I say just a word of blessing over you? And that is, Lord, that you would bless everybody. There are people who are hearing me right now, Father, that do not know or believe in who you are. And I'm so thankful that they have a chance to hear these words. And I pray I won't get in the way of your speaking to their heart, telling them that there's more to this life than they know. To set aside their pride and where they've been and to seek unvarnished truth. Lord, that's all we desire, is the truth of a fellowship with you found in the righteousness of Jesus. So with that, Father, I bless my friends and family and listeners, and I ask your blessings upon us with humble gratitude.